I never thought a single knock on my door could change the way I looked at my entire life. It was past midnight, the street outside silent except for the wind that rattled the leaves against the windows. I had been sitting alone with a half-finished glass of water, staring at nothing. When the sound came, 3 soft knocks, hesitant, almost frightened. For a moment I thought I imagined them. No one visits me at that hour. And yet those knocks carried something like a plea wrapped in silence that made my chest tighten before I even stood up. When I opened the door, she was standing there. Sarah Mitchell, my neighbor, her hair loose, falling across her face in the dim porch light, eyes red as if she hadn't slept in days. She didn't need to say a word for me to understand something was broken inside her. I had seen grief before, but not like that. Not so raw, not so close. I should explain who I am. My name's James Walker. I'm 43, a man who's learned to live quietly, maybe too quietly. After a divorce years ago, I chose routine over risks. Wake up, go to work, come home, repeat, safe, predictable. At least that's what I told myself. Truth is, I was just afraid of being hurt again. My world shrank until it was little more than walls and habits. But Sarah Mitchell, she was the kind of person you notice even if you try not to. She had moved into the house next door with her husband about 5 years back. I'd see them sometimes laughing as they worked in the yard or carrying groceries together. Then suddenly he was gone. A heart attack just like that. And the laughter that used to drift across our fence vanished overnight. Now she was standing at my door dressed in black, her hands trembling slightly as she whispered, "I couldn't stay there alone tonight." I didn't know what to say. I just stepped aside and let her in. She walked past me slowly as if each step carried the weight of 1,000 memories. I noticed her trying to hold herself together, but her eyes betrayed her. Those eyes told me she had been crying for hours. We sat at the kitchen table. I offered her tea, though neither of us really cared about tea. She wrapped her hands around the cup, like it was something to hold on to, and for a while silence filled the room. Not awkward silence, but the kind that speaks louder than words. I found myself studying her face. She was only 35, but grief had carved lines of exhaustion across her skin. Still, she was beautiful. Beautiful in a way that hurt because it wasn't about appearances. It was the strength it took to stand there, shattered, but still breathing, still fighting. "Everyone tells me it gets easier," she said suddenly, her voice shaking. "But what if it doesn't? What if I never feel normal again?" I wanted to answer, but what could I possibly say? I knew loneliness, but not her kind of loneliness. All I could do was listen, and maybe that was enough. The truth is, in that moment, something shifted inside me. I had built walls so high I forgot what it felt like to let someone in. And there she was sitting across from me, breaking through without even trying. I don't know why she chose me that night. Maybe because I was the closest. Maybe because she knew I wouldn't judge. Or maybe deep down she sensed I was just as lost in my own way. We stayed like that for hours, saying little, listening to the clock tick, the tea going cold. At one point, she leaned forward, resting her forehead on her hands, and whispered words that froze me in place. "I'm scared of being alone forever." I looked at her, and for the first time in years, I felt the urge to reach across the table. I didn't, not yet. But something told me this was only the beginning, and nothing in my life would be the same after that night. The next morning, I found myself standing at my kitchen window, staring at Sarah Mitchell's house as if I expected to see her. The curtains were still drawn. The place as silent as it had been since her husband passed. But after last night, the silence felt heavier, almost suffocating. I couldn't get her words out of my head. "I'm scared of being alone forever." They echoed in me, not just as her confession, but as something I'd felt myself for years without ever admitting. I kept replaying that night. The way she sat at my table, clutching the cup she never drank from. The way her voice cracked when she tried to be strong. And the way I almost reached for her hand but stopped, afraid of crossing a line neither of us was ready for. Later that day, I saw her outside for the first time in weeks. She was at the mailbox moving slowly, her hair tied back loosely, dressed in jeans and a plain sweater. She looked ordinary, And yet there was something extraordinary about the effort it took for her to step outside to face the world again. I walked over before I could talk myself out of it. "You're up early," I said, trying to sound casual. She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Didn't sleep much." For a moment, we just stood there, the morning sun catching in her hair, the street quiet around us. I wanted to say something meaningful, something that would lift the weight off her shoulders, but instead I asked, "Do you need anything?" "Groceries, maybe. I'm heading out later." Her lips curved in a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, James Walker. But I'm fine." She wasn't fine. Anyone could see that, but I didn't push. Sometimes people need space more than they need help. That evening, as I was fixing a leaky faucet in my kitchen, I heard a knock again, softer this time, almost apologetic. I opened the door, and there she was, holding a small dish covered with foil. "I made too much soup," she said quietly. "Thought maybe you'd want some." It was the first time in months she'd brought something over. My chest tightened. Not because of the soup, but because it meant she was trying, reaching for some connection instead of shutting herself away. We sat together again, eating at my table, the warm light from the lamp between us. She didn't talk much, but when she did, it was about little things. Her garden, how the weeds were taking over, how she missed the smell of fresh bread her husband used to bake. I listened, nodding, letting her words fill the spaces where silence had lived. At one point, she looked at me, her eyes softer than the night before. "I don't know why I keep coming here," she admitted. "Maybe because it feels less empty." I didn't answer right away. I just held her gaze and said finally, "You don't have to explain. I'm glad you're here." The truth was, I meant it more than I wanted to admit. Her presence in my house felt natural, as if she had always belonged there. And yet beneath the calm surface, there was tension, a pull neither of us spoke about, but both of us felt. When she left that night, she lingered at the door, her hand resting on the frame. "Thank you, James Walker," she whispered. Her voice was steady, but her eyes glistened in the dim light. I watched her walk back across the yard, her figure fading into the shadows. I stood there long after she'd gone, the faint smell of her perfume still in the air, wondering if I was in danger. Not from her grief, but from my own heart waking up after years of silence. Because I knew this wasn't just about being a good neighbor anymore. Something was changing between us, and no matter how much I tried to deny it, I could feel it every time she looked at me. I didn't expect her to knock again so soon. It was 3 nights later, the sky heavy with rain, when I heard it, a firm, hurried knock that carried none of the hesitation of before. I opened the door and there she was, drenched from the downpour, strands of wet hair clinging to her face, eyes shining with something I couldn't name. "I couldn't stay there," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The storm, it makes the house feel even emptier." Without a word, I stepped aside. She walked in, leaving a trail of raindrops across my floor. I handed her a towel, watching as she pressed it against her hair, her shoulders shivering slightly from the cold. There was something raw about her in that moment. No walls, no masks, just grief and exhaustion exposed in the simplest way. We sat on the couch, the storm rattling the windows, filling the silence between us. She pulled her knees up, wrapping the towel tighter around herself. I wanted to ask if she was all right, but the answer was obvious. Instead, I said, "You don't have to go through this alone, Sarah Mitchell." Her eyes met mine, wide and uncertain, like she wasn't sure if she believed me. Everyone says that. And yet, when the night comes, it's just me in that house. I didn't know what to say. Words felt too small, too fragile. So, I just stayed there close enough for her to feel she wasn't alone. After a while, she rested her head against the back of the couch, staring at the ceiling. "You ever wonder if some people just aren't meant to find peace?" she asked softly. Her question caught me off guard. I thought about my own life, the failed marriage, the years of keeping people at a distance. The quiet nights I pretended didn't feel lonely. "Maybe peace doesn't come all at once," I said finally. "Maybe it's just small moments when someone sits beside you and doesn't leave." She looked at me, then really looked, and for the first time I saw something in her eyes that wasn't only sadness. It was fragile, like a spark fighting against the rain. We talked more that night. Not about her husband, not about grief, but about ordinary things. Movies we used to like, the books gathering dust on our shelves. The meals we ruined trying to cook. We even laughed once, and the sound startled both of us. For a second, it felt like life pushing its way back in. When the storm began to ease, she stood up reluctantly. "I should go," she said, though her voice didn't sound convinced. I walked her to the door. The air outside was still damp, the street lights casting long shadows across the wet pavement. She lingered there, her hand resting on the doorframe just as it had before. But this time she didn't whisper thanks and leave. She hesitated, her lips parting as if she wanted to say more. Finally, she murmured, "It's strange, James Walker. I don't feel the emptiness here." My throat tightened. I wanted to tell her I felt the same, that her presence filled a void I hadn't realized was so deep. But I just nodded, afraid my voice might betray more than I was ready to admit. She gave me a small, almost shy smile, then stepped into the night. I watched her walk away, the damp air swirling around her until she disappeared into her house. Long after, I sat back on the couch where she had been, the cushion still faintly warm. And for the first time in years, I let myself imagine a life that wasn't just routine and silence. A life where maybe, just maybe, two broken people could find something whole together. I should have known the quiet wouldn't last. When two people start spending time together, even without meaning to, the world notices. And in a small neighborhood like ours, whispers spread faster than truth. It started with Henry Blake, the man who lived 2 doors down, always out on his porch, always watching. The morning after that stormy night, I saw him smirking as Sarah Mitchell left my house with her coat pulled tightly around her. He raised an eyebrow and said loud enough for both of us to hear, "Well, isn't this cozy?" Sarah Mitchell froze. Color rose in her cheeks, and she hurried toward her door without answering. I glared at him, but he only shrugged, sipping his coffee like he just won a game I didn't know we were playing. That small remark festered. I knew it would get around. People like Henry Blake lived for gossip, and I hated the thought of Sarah Mitchell, still fragile from her loss, having to endure judgment from neighbors who knew nothing about what she was going through. That evening, she knocked again, not with the same trembling as before, but with determination, like she'd decided something. She stepped inside and said quietly, "They're talking." I nodded. "I know. I'm sorry." Her eyes flashed. "Don't be sorry. It's just I can't handle pity or worse, scandal. I already feel like I'm walking through fire every day." She sat at the table, burying her face in her hands. I sat across from her, fighting the urge to reach out. The truth was, I wanted to protect her, not just from gossip, but from the loneliness that had dragged her to my door in the first place. After a long silence, she looked up. "Do you regret letting me in that night?" The question cut through me. "No," I said firmly. "Not for a second." Her expression softened, but there was still a shadow in her eyes. "Then maybe I should stop coming before people make this into something it isn't." I leaned forward, my voice lower than I expected. "And what if it already is something?" She blinked, startled, as if I'd spoken words she wasn't ready to hear. The air between us grew heavy, charged with the things neither of us dared name. She didn't answer. Instead, she stood and walked to the window, staring out into the dark street. I followed her with my eyes, the curve of her shoulders outlined against the lamplight. She whispered almost to herself, "I don't know if I can survive caring for someone again. Losing once was enough." Her words hit me like a weight, but I didn't push. I knew grief was a slow burn. It didn't vanish because someone offered warmth. All I could do was stay near, steady as the ground beneath her feet. We ended the evening quietly. She left earlier than usual, her good night soft, almost uncertain. I watched her cross the yard, and sure enough, Henry Blake was on his porch again, pretending to smoke. His eyes met mine with that same smug look, like he had a secret to tell. I closed the door harder than I meant to. Inside, The house smelled faintly of her perfume, a reminder that even in the face of gossip and fear, I didn't want her to stop coming. I couldn't pretend anymore. It was not just about being neighbors. Something deeper had begun, fragile but undeniable. And that realization scared me as much as it comforted me. Because love, if that's what this was becoming, was never safe. Not for her. Not for me. The whispers grew louder. I could feel them every time I walked down the street. Every time I glanced toward the houses where curtains shifted just a little too quickly. Henry Blake's smirk had turned into knowing nods. And even Ellen Price, the woman who lived across from us, stopped me one morning just to say, "She's vulnerable. James Walker, don't take advantage." The words stung not because they were true, but because they weren't. No one could see what really happened behind closed doors. In the quiet moments when Sarah Mitchell sat at my table, her hands wrapped around a mug, her heart fighting to breathe again. And yet, the pressure was getting to her. I saw it in the way she hesitated before knocking, the way she glanced over her shoulder as if every step was being watched. One night, she came in and didn't sit down right away. She stood by the door, arms crossed, her voice low. "I don't think I can keep doing this." My chest tightened. Doing what? Coming here? Letting them see? Letting them think? Her words trailed off, but the fear in her eyes said everything. I've already buried one life. I can't bear to live under their judgment, too. I wanted to argue to tell her none of it mattered, but the truth is, it did. Gossip has teeth, and she'd already been torn apart by loss. The last thing she needed was another wound. So I said nothing, just watched her, every part of me screaming against the silence. Finally, she whispered, "Maybe it's safer if I stop." That night, she left without looking back. The house felt colder than it ever had before. I sat in the dark, staring at the empty chair across from me, wondering if this was how it ended. Not with a fight, not with a goodbye, but with fear winning over whatever it was we'd found. Days passed. I saw her once or twice in the yard, but she avoided my eyes. Henry Blake nodded at me like he'd won, and I hated myself for letting her walk away. Then one evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the street in gold, I heard a knock. My heart jumped before I even moved. I opened the door, and there she was, not trembling this time, but standing firm. "I can't pretend anymore," she said, her voice steady, though her eyes shimmered with tears. "Being with you, it doesn't take away the pain, but it makes it bearable. And that scares me more than the gossip because it means I still have something to lose." I stepped closer, every wall I'd built crumbling with her words. "You're not alone in this, Sarah Mitchell. I've been afraid for years, afraid to care, afraid to risk. But when you walk away, it feels worse than any fear I've ever known." For a moment, we just stood there, silence heavy with everything we hadn't said. Then she let out a breath that sounded almost like relief. "So what do we do?" I didn't reach for her hand, though I wanted to. I just looked at her and said, "We face it together, one day at a time." Her shoulders eased, the faintest smile breaking through the sadness. And for the first time since the night she knocked on my door, I believed it might be possible for both of us to build something new out of the wreckage. She stepped inside, closing the door softly behind her. The house felt different, immediately warmer, as if her presence alone had changed the air. I don't know what tomorrow will bring. I don't know how long the whispers will last or whether the world will ever understand us. But as I sat with her that evening, listening to the quiet hum of life returning, I realized it didn't matter because sometimes peace doesn't come from silence or safety. Sometimes it comes from choosing to care even when it hurts. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid to.